She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw things, break dishes, or leave a note soaked in tears on the kitchen counter. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call her friends. She didn't post anything. She didn't make a single sound that anyone in that building could later say they heard. Sarah Osei-John did something far more devastating than any of that. She took off her wedding ring, held it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to feel the weight of 14 years sitting in her palm, and then she dropped it in the trash. Quietly. Deliberately. Like she was discarding something that had expired. Like she had already grieved it, already buried it, already moved through the other side of the pain while her husband was busy choosing someone else. And then she picked up her bag and walked out. No slamming door. No final words. Just the soft, certain click of a latch, the quietest sound John Hyun-soo never heard because he wasn't home. He was with her. The other woman. Laughing at a dinner table across the city while his wife of 14 years was removing every trace of him from her body with the calm, focused energy of a woman who had made up her mind a long time ago and was only now, finally, acting on it. He came home at 2 a.m. The penthouse was dark. That was not unusual. Sarah went to bed early when she had early calls with her father's office in Accra. He moved through the darkness without turning on lights, a habit built from years of operating in spaces where too much visibility was a liability. He poured himself a drink. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, looking at the outline of what he assumed was his wife sleeping beside him. He didn't reach for her. He hadn't reached for her in months. He slept. It was 6 a.m. when he found it. He was in the kitchen, still in yesterday's shirt, waiting for the coffee to finish, when something caught his eye in the open trash bin near the counter. A small, sharp glint. Something catching the early light in a way that didn't belong there. He almost ignored it. He almost walked past it and poured his coffee and started his morning and let the day carry him forward the way it always did. But he didn't. He reached in. And when he pulled it out and held it up and recognized it, really recognized it, the specific weight of it, the particular cut of the diamond he had spent 2 hours choosing in a jewelry store on Michigan Avenue 14 years ago because nothing else was good enough for her. Something happened to John Hyun-soo that had not happened to him since he was a frightened young man with nothing. His hands started shaking. He turned toward the bedroom. Walked fast. Pushed the door open. The bed was made. Her side was smooth, unslept in, perfectly arranged. Her closet door was open, not ransacked, not emptied in anger, but carefully, selectively cleared. The things she truly valued, gone. The things that didn't matter, left behind with the same quiet precision she applied to everything in her life. Sarah was gone. Not stormed out. Not temporarily staying with a friend. Gone. He stood in the doorway of that bedroom holding her wedding ring in his fist, and the full weight of what he had done, what he had been doing, slowly, carelessly, arrogantly, for the past 2 years landed on him all at once like a building coming down. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He crossed the room and picked it up. Dae-young. His enforcer. The message was 3 words. Asterisk call me. Urgent. Asterisk. He stared at the message. Then he looked at the ring in his other hand. Then he sat down slowly on Sarah's side of the bed, the side he had ignored for months, and he did something that would have shocked every single person who had ever feared his name. He just sat there. He didn't call Dae-young back. He didn't move. He just sat on his wife's side of the bed in the early morning silence of a $4 million penthouse that suddenly felt like the loneliest place on earth, turning her ring over and over in his fingers, and tried to remember exactly when he had decided that she wasn't enough. He couldn't pinpoint it. That was the thing. There was no single moment he could point to and say there, that's where I went wrong. It had been gradual. Comfortable. The way all slow disasters are. One compromise. One justification. One evening spent somewhere he shouldn't have been, with someone he had no business looking at twice, telling himself it meant nothing. Until it meant everything. Until Yuna. But before we get to Yuna, and we will get to her, don't worry, because her role in this story is not what you think it is. You need to understand who Sarah Osei truly was. Because this story only hits the way it's supposed to hit when you understand exactly what kind of woman Hyun-soo had sitting across from him every morning at that kitchen table. What he was given. What he was trusted with. What he wasted. Sarah was born in Atlanta, Georgia, to a Ghanaian father and an American mother. She grew up in 2 worlds and never once struggled to carry both. She had her father's stillness, that deep, immovable calm that people chronically mistook for passivity until the moment she decided to correct that misunderstanding. She had her mother's warmth, the kind that made people feel immediately seen and safe in her presence. She had a master's degree in international trade. She spoke 4 languages. She had taken her father's import-export operation from a strong regional business into a quietly formidable international network before she was 30 years old. She did not talk about what she had built. She simply operated at a level that made the talking unnecessary. She was also, and this is the detail that had undone Hyun-soo from the very beginning, completely, almost infuriatingly unimpressed by dangerous men. Not reckless. Not naive. She understood danger perfectly well. She had grown up watching her father navigate complex, high-stakes environments with grace and absolute control. She simply refused to perform off for men who expected it. She met power with composure. She met intimidation with stillness. She met John Hyun-soo at a private business dinner on the 47th floor of a downtown Chicago hotel and spent 3 hours talking to him like he was a person, not a reputation, not a legend, not something to be impressed by or afraid of. Just a person. He had never experienced that before. Not once in his adult life. He called her the next morning. She made him wait a week before she called back, not as a game, but because she had actual things to do and a phone call from an interesting man at a dinner party was not an emergency. He later told his second-in-command, Park Sung-jin, that the week she made him wait was the longest week of his life. Sung-jin had laughed. Hyun-soo had not. They dated for 8 months. He proposed in Accra, on the rooftop of her father's compound, with the lights of the city below them and a ring he had sweated over for 2 hours in a Michigan Avenue jewelry store. Kwame Osei had watched from a window upstairs with an expression on his face that was difficult to read, somewhere between approval and a warning that nobody present had been wise enough to take seriously. If he ever disrespects you, Kwame told his daughter privately that night, it is finished. All of it. Sarah had squeezed her father's hand. He won't, she said. She believed it. Completely. At the time. If Sarah's story is already hitting you, if something about a woman this strong being treated this way is making you feel something, drop it in the comments right now. And if you are new here, subscribe immediately because this story is about to go to places you are not ready for. Like this video, share it, and tell me where are you watching from. Drop your city, your country, your continent in the comments. I want to see my audience. Let's go. The first 4 years of their marriage were not perfect, but they were real. Hyun-soo was present in a way that surprised even him. He came home. He asked about her work and actually listened to the answers. He sat across from Kwame Osei twice a year and maintained the respect that the older man's silence demanded without ever being told explicitly what was required of him. He was, in those years, trying. Sarah saw the trying. She honored it. But the syndicate was growing. The money was getting bigger. The rooms Hyun-soo was operating in were getting more dangerous and more intoxicating in equal measure. And with the growth came something that success does to certain kinds of men, a slow, creeping rearrangement of priorities that is invisible until it has already restructured everything. He started coming home later. Then not at all some nights. The explanations were always credible, always business, and Sarah was not a woman who needed her husband attached to her side to feel secure. She had her own work, her own purpose. She gave him room because she respected him and because she understood the life. But room, when given to the wrong man at the wrong moment, does not produce gratitude. It produces distance. And distance, left unaddressed, produces exactly the kind of emptiness that a certain kind of woman is very skilled at filling. Her name was Yuna. And she had been watching Hyun-soo for a very long time. Yuna Park was not the most beautiful woman in Hyun-soo's world. She was not the smartest. She was not the most accomplished. She did not have Sarah's depth or Sarah's stillness or Sarah's particular brand of quiet, unshakable authority that made people instinctively trust her in rooms full of strangers. What Yuna had was something more dangerous than any of those things. She had patience. And she had a plan. She had entered the Syndicate's orbit 3 years ago as a junior financial consultant attached to one of their legitimate front companies, a real estate development firm on the north side of Chicago. She was sharp, efficient, and careful never to overreach. She learned the structure of the organization faster than anyone expected. She learned who mattered, who was decorative, and who held actual power. She learned Hyun-soo's schedule, his preferences, his pressure points, and his vanities with the focused dedication of someone who was not simply working a job, but executing a long-term strategy. She also learned about Sarah. And here is where Yuna proved herself truly dangerous. She did not make the mistake that most women in her position would have made. She did not try to compete with Sarah. She did not try to be better than Sarah or smarter than Sarah or more impressive than Sarah. She understood, with cold clarity, that competing with Sarah Osei on any of those terms was a losing proposition. So she did something else entirely. She made herself easy. Everything about Yuna was designed to feel like relief. Where Sarah was deep, Yuna was surface, smooth, uncomplicated, requiring nothing difficult from the man sitting across from her. Where Sarah challenged Hyun-soo, pushed back on his thinking, held him accountable to the version of himself he had promised to be, Yuna simply agreed. She laughed at everything he said. She made him feel brilliant and powerful and unquestioned in a way that Sarah, who loved him enough to tell him the truth, had never been willing to manufacture. It felt to Hyun-soo like rest. That was the trap. He mistook the absence of depth for the presence of peace. The first time he stayed late at the office with Yuna, it was, genuinely, for work. The second time, he told himself the same thing and almost believed it. By the third time, he had stopped explaining it to himself at all, which is how men like Hyun-soo operate when they are doing something they already know is wrong. They don't justify it. They just move forward and let the momentum carry them past the point where stopping is comfortable. Sarah noticed. Of course she noticed. Sarah noticed everything. She had simply learned, over years of loving a complicated man in a complicated world, to choose carefully which battles were worth the energy of fighting. She watched. She waited. She filed things away in that precise, organized mind of hers and continued showing up as his wife with full dignity, while internally she was already beginning to calculate. She asked him once, directly, over dinner on a Tuesday night, without drama or accusation, just her eyes on his face and a question that deserved an honest answer. Is there someone else? Hyun-soo had looked at her across the table. His jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. No, he said. Don't ask me things like that. Sarah had looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up her fork and continued eating. She didn't ask again. That was the moment, that specific Tuesday dinner, that something shifted permanently inside Sarah Osei. Not broke. Sarah did not break. But something that had been open closed very quietly. And in its place, something else began to take shape. Something considered and purposeful and entirely her own. Hyun-soo did not notice. He was already somewhere else in his mind. The affair became real 6 months after that dinner. Hyun-soo did not stumble into it. He walked into it with his eyes open and his judgment deliberately suspended, the way a man does when he has already decided what he wants and is only waiting for himself to stop pretending otherwise. Yuna had simply been present, consistently, strategically present, until presence became familiarity and familiarity became something he reached for. He told himself it was separate. That it had nothing to do with his marriage. That Sarah and Yuna existed in completely different compartments of his life, and that he was capable of maintaining both without damage to either. This is what unfaithful men always tell themselves. It is never true. The compartments always leak. The Syndicate senior leadership knew within 2 months. In an organization built on information, secrets of this kind do not stay contained. They move through back channels and casual observations and the careful eyes of people whose entire professional value lies in knowing things that other people don't. Park Sung-jin, Hyun-soo's second-in-command and the closest thing he had to a genuine friend, came to him privately on a Wednesday afternoon and sat across from him in his office and said nothing for a long moment. You need to end it, Sung-jin finally said. Hyun-soo leaned back in his chair. Mind your business. This is my business. Sarah is. I said mind your business, Sung-jin. Sung-jin looked at him for a long time. He had known Hyun-soo for 20 years. He had seen him make hard decisions, dangerous decisions, brilliant decisions. He had never seen him make a stupid one until now. She is not what you think she is, Sung-jin said quietly. He was talking about Yuna. There are things about her that you don't. We're done talking about this. Hyun-soo's voice was flat. Final. The voice he used when a conversation was over. Sung-jin stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at his boss, his friend, with something that was equal parts frustration and grief. When it falls apart, he said at the door, and it will fall apart. Don't say I didn't tell you. He left. Hyun-soo sat alone in his office and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and texted Yuna. Now here is what nobody, not Sung-jin, not the Syndicate, not even Hyun-soo himself, had taken the time to properly examine. The West African Supply Corridor. The most valuable route in the entire Syndicate's operation. The one that moved the highest volume with the lowest risk through the most strategically positioned port access on the continent. The route that had made Hyun-soo's expansion possible. The route that had taken their operation from strong regional presence to genuine international infrastructure. That route ran entirely through Kwame Osei, Sarah's father. And Kwame Osei had not opened that relationship because of Hyun-soo's reputation or the Syndicate's resources or any negotiation conducted across a formal table. He had opened it because Sarah had asked him to, Because his daughter, his brilliant, careful, deeply trusted daughter, had sat across from him in Accra and put her personal credibility on the line for this man. Kwame had agreed because of Sarah. Only because of Sarah. Hyun-soo had been present for the early meetings. He had shaken Kwame's hand and conducted himself with appropriate respect and assumed, in the way powerful men often assume things that are convenient for them, that the relationship now belonged to him. That it was a business arrangement between two operations. That it would continue independent of any personal circumstances because that is how business worked. He had never once stopped to consider that Kwame Osei did not separate business from family. Not ever. Not for any amount of money. Sarah knew this. She had always known this. She had filed it away carefully in that organized mind of hers, next to everything else she was watching and waiting on. She had never mentioned it to Hyun-soo. He had never thought to ask. The night everything broke open publicly happened on a Thursday in March. A syndicate dinner. Mandatory attendance for all senior members and their families. Held at a private venue in the Gold Coast, a renovated townhouse that the organization used for formal gatherings, stripped of anything that could be photographed or recorded, swept for devices every time before the doors opened. Sarah arrived in a deep burgundy dress that she had bought in Paris the previous autumn. She wore no jewelry except for her wedding ring and the small gold earrings her mother had given her for her 30th birthday. She walked in on Hyun-soo's arm and greeted people with the warmth and composure that had made her genuinely respected in rooms that did not easily extend respect to outsiders. She was extraordinary that evening. Even the people who had complicated feelings about her presence in their world could not deny it. There was something about her, an energy, a completeness, that made her impossible to dismiss. Yuna arrived 40 minutes later. She had not been invited as anyone's partner. She was there under the cover of a professional role, administrative support for one of the senior members. It was a thin excuse, and everyone in that room who mattered understood exactly what it was. Sarah understood immediately. She said nothing. She did not change her expression. She did not grip Hyun-soo's arm tighter, or lean into him, or perform any of the territorial signals that would have communicated insecurity. She simply observed, with those quiet, precise eyes, and continued her conversations as though nothing had shifted. But something had shifted. Because Hyun-soo, and this is the part that is almost impossible to understand from the outside, the part that reveals exactly who he had become inside that life, Hyun-soo looked at Yuna across that room and forgot, for a terrible, public, unforgivable moment, to pretend. He crossed the room to her. In front of everyone. In front of his wife. In front of every senior member of the organization who was watching with varying degrees of discomfort and fascination. He crossed the room to Yuna and spoke to her in a low voice and touched the small of her back with a familiarity that required no interpretation. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when something has just happened that cannot be undone. Sarah was standing 12 feet away. She saw it. Every person in that room watched her see it. And Sarah Osei-jeon did something that nobody present would ever forget for the rest of their lives. She finished her sentence. She was mid-conversation with the wife of a senior member, a quiet, nervous woman named Mrs. Cho who was looking at Sarah with an expression of horrified sympathy, and Sarah finished her sentence, laughed softly at something she herself had just said, excused herself graciously, set her glass down on a nearby table with a steady hand, and walked to the exit. No tears. No confrontation. No scene. Just her back, straight as a blade, moving through that room like she was leaving by choice. Like this place, these people, this life had simply ceased to be worth her time. The door closed behind her. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Hyun-soo turned around. And for the first time that evening he looked at the space where his wife had been standing and something moved across his face, something complicated and ugly and too late, before his expression closed back down into the flat, controlled mask he showed the world. He did not go after her. That was his final, fatal mistake. If you felt that, if Sarah walking out of that room with her head high just hit you somewhere deep, let me know in the comments. What would you have done in her position? And if this story is gripping you, hit that like button right now, because the algorithm needs to know this story deserves to be heard. Subscribe if you haven't already. Sarah did not go to a friend's house. She did not go to a hotel in a state of shock, sitting on the edge of a strange bed scrolling through her phone looking for someone to call. She did not drive around the city crying. She did not do any of the things that the people she left behind in that room probably imagined her doing, falling apart somewhere private, grief-struck and undone, waiting for her husband to come after her. She went home. She walked into the penthouse at 10:47 p.m., set her clutch on the kitchen counter, and stood in the center of that beautiful, expensive, carefully decorated space for exactly 1 minute. Just stood there, breathing, looking at everything around her with the calm, systematic eyes of a woman who was no longer looking at her home, but at an inventory. Then she went to the bedroom and changed out of her Paris dress and sat at the small writing desk near the window that overlooked the city and opened her laptop. She made 3 calls that night. Not emotional calls. Not calls to friends who would gasp and commiserate and tell her she deserved better. Strategic calls. The first was to her personal attorney, a sharp, discreet woman named Angela Reeves who had been on Sarah's private retainer for 2 years, which told you everything you needed to know about how long Sarah had been quietly preparing for a moment she prayed would never come. The second call was to her father in Accra. Kwame Osei picked up on the second ring, despite it being nearly 6 a.m. his time. He said nothing when she told him. He simply listened in the way he had always listened, with his full self, with that ancient stillness that had shaped his daughter's character from the time she was small. When she finished talking, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you safe?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Another silence. "I will wait for your instruction," he said. That was all. No rage. No threats. No dramatic declarations. Just 4 words that carried the weight of everything, 4 words that meant, "I am behind you. I am ready. Tell me when." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Not yet," she said. "I need a few more days." "Take what you need," Kwame said. The third call she made that night was brief and logistical, to a property management company that handled a furnished apartment she had maintained quietly in the West Loop for 14 months. An apartment that Hyun-soo did not know existed. Paid for through a personal account that was entirely hers, entirely clean, entirely untraceable to anything connected to him or the Syndicate. Sarah had not been planning to leave. She needed to be honest with herself about that. She had maintained that apartment the way a careful person maintains an emergency exit, not because she was planning to use it, but because she was the kind of person who understood that the time to build an exit is never when you desperately need one. She had built it anyway. Just in case. Just in case had arrived. She packed that night with the focused efficiency of someone who had mentally rehearsed this moment enough times to move through it without paralysis. She did not take everything. She took what was hers, documents, devices, specific items of personal value, clothing that she had bought with her own money. She left behind everything that was joint, everything that was his, everything that was the marriage. She stood in the bathroom doorway for a moment, looking at the counter where their things sat side by side, his watch, her moisturizer, the small domestic architecture of a shared life, and she felt it then. The grief. It moved through her like weather, sharp and real and physical, and she did not push it away or rush past it. She let it come. She stood in that doorway and felt the full weight of 14 years and everything she had loved and everything she had lost and everything she had tried and everything that had not been enough. 30 seconds. She gave herself 30 seconds. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the kitchen. She stood at the counter for a moment. Her left hand was resting on the surface, and she looked down at it at the ring. The diamond caught the kitchen light. She thought about the rooftop in Accra. She thought about the jewelry store on Michigan Avenue and Hyun-soo standing there for 2 hours because nothing was good enough. She thought about Tuesday dinner and his jaw tightening and his voice saying, "Don't ask me things like that." She thought about the way he had crossed that room tonight without looking back. She took the ring off. She held it in her palm. 3 seconds. Just like the night he put it on her finger, 3 seconds of holding it with both hands, looking at it, feeling the weight. Then she dropped it in the trash. Not thrown. Not hurled. Dropped. With the same quiet deliberateness she applied to everything. A decision, not a reaction. A conclusion, not a collapse. She picked up her bag. She walked out. The latch clicked softly behind her. Hyun-soo came home at 2 a.m. to a dark apartment and a made bed and a wife he assumed was sleeping. He woke up at 6 a.m. and found the ring. And now he was sitting on her side of the bed with her ring in his fist and 3 missed calls from Daejung on his phone and a silence in that apartment that was unlike any silence he had ever experienced because it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of consequence. The particular quiet of a world that has shifted permanently on its axis while you were looking somewhere else. He finally called Daejung back. His enforcer picked up immediately. "Where have you been?" Daejung's voice was tight. Controlled but tight, which from a man like Daejung was the equivalent of panic. "Talk," Hyun-soo said. "We have a problem with the West African corridor." Hyun-soo was quiet for a moment. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where it stopped. Completely. As of this morning, nothing is moving." Port contact isn't responding. The broker in Lagos went dark overnight. The Accra office, the Ose operation, their communication lines are just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. Hyunsu said nothing. Hyunsu. Daejeong's voice dropped lower. This corridor moves 40% of our volume. If this doesn't come back online in 72 hours, we have commitments we cannot meet. People we cannot disappoint. You understand what I'm saying? I understand, Hyunsu said quietly. He was still holding the ring. Do you want me to reach out to Kwame Ose directly? Daejeong asked. A long pause. I'll handle it, Hyunsu said. He hung up. He sat there for another moment. Then he called Sarah's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice calm, warm, professional, telling him she was unavailable and to leave a message. He hung up. Called again. Voicemail. He texted. Sarah. Call me. Please. He watched the message. Single tick. Not delivered. She had blocked him. He sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt, and called Sung-jin. Sung-jin picked up on the first ring. His voice, when he spoke, had the careful neutrality of a man who had been expecting this call and had already decided not to say I told you so. She's gone, Hyunsu said. I know, Sung-jin said. How do you know? Because Mrs. Cho called her husband last night from the car on the way home, and her husband told me this morning. Everyone knows, Hyunsu. After last night, everyone knows. Hyunsu closed his eyes briefly. I need you to find her. Silence on the line. Sung-jin. I heard you. Another pause. I'll make some calls. But I need to tell you something first, and I need you to actually listen this time. Talk. The corridor going down, it's not a coincidence. The timing is not a coincidence. You need to think very carefully about what Sarah leaving actually means for this organization. Not for your marriage. For this organization. Hyunsu's jaw tightened. Find her, he said. He hung up. He walked to the kitchen. Poured the coffee that had been sitting since 6 a.m. and was now cold. Drank it cold anyway, standing at the counter, staring at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 42 floors below, Chicago was already moving, already loud and purposeful and indifferent to the fact that his world was coming apart in a penthouse above it. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered immediately. Silence on the line. Then a voice he recognized, one of the Syndicate's senior figures. Elderly. A man in his 70s who had been in this business longer than Hyunsu had been alive and who did not make phone calls unless the matter was serious enough to require his personal involvement. Hyunsu, Elderly said. His voice was quiet and very cold. Elderly. I am going to ask you one question and I need a real answer. Yes, sir. Where is Sarah? The kitchen felt very small suddenly. She left last night. It's a personal matter. I'm handling. It is not a personal matter. Elderly's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The corridor going dark this morning tells me it is not a personal matter. You need to find your wife, Hyunsu. Not for your sake. For all of ours. The line went dead. Hyunsu set the phone down on the counter. He looked at the trash bin. At the ring he had placed on the counter next to his coffee cup. He picked it up again. Turned it over in his fingers. He thought about the night he proposed. Rooftop in Accra. The lights of the city. Kwame watching from the window upstairs with that expression that Hyunsu had read as approval but was now, with the cold clarity of hindsight, understanding for the first time had never been approval at all. It had been a warning. If he ever disrespects you, it is finished. He hadn't known about those words. Sarah had never told him. But standing in his kitchen at 7 a.m. holding her discarded wedding ring while his empire quietly bled out from a wound he had inflicted himself, he understood, with a certainty that required no confirmation, that something had been said. Something had been agreed. Some condition had been set 14 years ago that he had just violated completely. And Kwame Ose was a man who kept his word. Have you ever watched someone throw away something irreplaceable and not realize its value until it was already gone? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. If this story is gripping you right now, hit that like button and share this video because Sarah's story deserves every single view. The first domino fell at 9 a.m. Hyunsu was in his office on the 14th floor of a legitimate real estate firm that served as the Syndicate's primary front when his financial director, a thin, precise man named Mr. Kang, walked in without knocking, which in itself told Hyunsu everything he needed to know about the severity of what was coming. Mr. Kang set a single sheet of paper on the desk. A transaction report. Hyunsu picked it up and scanned it and felt something cold move through his chest. 3 of their largest silent partners had initiated withdrawal requests overnight. Not 1. Not 2. 3. Simultaneously. The kind of simultaneity that does not happen by accident. The kind that happens when people have been talking to each other and have reached a collective decision and are moving together with the coordinated precision of people who have already decided that a sinking ship is not worth the risk of loyalty. When did these come in? Hyunsu asked. His voice was flat. Controlled. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., Mr. Kong said. Hyunsu looked up from the paper. All three while I was asleep. Yes, sir. He set the paper down. Who knew about the corridor going dark before I did? Mr. Kang hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. Kong. There were communications yesterday afternoon. Before the dinner. Between the Osei office in Accra, and he paused, choosing his words with the careful precision of a man who understood that delivering bad news badly was its own kind of danger. And at least 2 of the 3 partners who submitted withdrawal requests this morning. Hyunsu went very still. Yesterday afternoon. Before the dinner. Before Sarah had even seen what happened in that room with Yuna. Before the public humiliation. Before the final breaking point. Which meant the corridor going dark was not a reaction to last night. It was not a spontaneous decision made by a grieving father in response to his daughter calling him in tears. It had been scheduled. Planned. Set in motion before the dinner even began. Sarah had known what was going to happen at that dinner before she walked in. She had dressed in that burgundy dress and put on those gold earrings and walked in on his arm with full knowledge of what she was about to witness, because she had not been walking in blind. She had known about Yuna. She had known about the invitation. She had known, with the precise foreknowledge of a woman who had been watching and calculating for a very long time, that Thursday evening was going to be the night it became undeniable. And she had already made her calls before she arrived. She had walked into that dinner not as a wife about to be humiliated. She had walked in as a woman executing the final step of a plan she had been building for months. The humiliation had not broken her. She had used it. She had let it happen publicly, in front of witnesses, so that no one could later question or minimize what Hyunsu had done. So that the record was clean and the cause was unambiguous. Sarah Osei did not react. She documented. Hyunsu sat back in his chair and felt the full architectural genius of what his wife had done settle over him like cold water. Get out, he said quietly to Mr. Kang. Mr. Kang left without another word. Sung-jin came in 20 minutes later. He sat across from Hyunsu and placed his phone on the desk between them, screen up, displaying a message thread. Read the bottom, Sung-jin said. Hyunsu leaned forward and read. The message was from an anonymous contact that Sung-jin's network had flagged overnight. It was brief. It contained 3 pieces of information, the identities of 2 individuals who had been feeding information about the Syndicate's internal structure to a rival organization operating out of Los Angeles, the account numbers of 2 shell companies that had been skimming from the Syndicate's legitimate revenue streams for 8 months, and the name of the person who had introduced both individuals to the rival organization in the first place. Hyunsu read the name at the bottom of the message. He read it again. Then he looked up at Sung-jin. Yuna, he said. The word came out flat, almost quiet. The way a man says something when he is not surprised and is furious at himself for not being surprised. Sung-jin said nothing. He didn't need to. How long? Hyunsu asked. From what I can piece together. Since before she joined the firm. She came in with an agenda already in place. The Los Angeles organization identified you as an expansion target 18 months ago. She was their insertion point. Sung-jin paused. She was never interested in you personally, Hyunsu. You were the access point. The affair was the mechanism. Keep you distracted, keep you making bad decisions, keep you isolated from the people who might have seen what she was doing. He glanced at the phone, people like Sarah. Hyunsu was quiet for a very long time. Sarah knew, he said. It wasn't a question. I think Sarah suspected. Whether she had confirmation, Sung-jin shrugged carefully, I don't know. But I think it's worth asking yourself why a woman as intelligent as your wife, who clearly saw something was wrong, chose not to confront Yuna directly. Not to expose her. Not to bring it to you or to the organization. Hyunsu looked at him. Because she was waiting, Sung-jin said quietly. She was waiting until she had everything she needed. Until the timing served her completely. Sarah didn't just want to leave. She wanted to leave in a position of power. And she wanted whatever came next to be entirely on her terms. The office felt very small. Where is she? Hyunsu asked. We don't know. She's not at any location we can connect to her. Her phone is either off or destroyed. Angela Reeves, her attorney, has already sent a formal communication to our legal team this morning. Very clean, very precise. Zero emotional language. Sarah is filing for divorce. Full asset separation. She wants nothing from the organization. Nothing from the joint accounts. Nothing that was ever his. Only what was provably, documentably hers before and during the marriage. Hyunsu frowned. She's entitled to more than that. Significantly more. I know. Then why? Because she doesn't want your money, Hyunsu. Sungjin's voice was not unkind, but it was very direct. She never wanted your money. She wants to be clean. She wants to walk away from everything connected to you and leave nothing behind that could be used to pull her back. No joint assets means no leverage. No leverage means no reason for this organization or anyone in it to ever have cause to involve themselves in her life again. Hyunsu absorbed this. She's protecting herself, he said. She's protecting herself, Sungjin confirmed. Completely. Intelligently. She thought of everything. A long silence settled over the office. Outside the window, Chicago moved through its ordinary Friday with total indifference. Somewhere in the city, or perhaps already beyond it, perhaps already on a plane, perhaps already sitting in her father's compound in Accra surrounded by people who loved her without condition, Sarah Osei was living the first hours of a life entirely her own. Hyunsu turned the ring over in his fingers. He had been carrying it since this morning. He couldn't explain why. It wasn't sentiment exactly, or maybe it was, twisted into something uglier by the particular shame of a man who understands too late that he destroyed something that could not be reconstructed. The Syndicate wants a meeting, Sungjin said. Elder Lee, the full senior council. This afternoon. About the corridor. About everything. The corridor, the withdrawals, Yuna, the Los Angeles situation. All of it. They want answers and they want a path forward and frankly, Sungjin stopped himself. Say it. Sungjin looked at him steadily. Frankly, there are people on that council who are questioning your leadership. Who are saying that a man who couldn't manage his own house cannot be trusted to manage this organization. That what happened last night, publicly, in front of everyone, reflects a judgment problem that goes beyond personal life. Hyunsu said nothing. Elder Lee specifically asked, Sungjin continued carefully, whether there was any possibility of reaching Sarah directly. Not through attorneys. Directly. Whether there was any channel, any relationship, any point of access that could open a conversation about the corridor. They want me to go to my wife and beg her to save my business. They want the corridor restored. How that happens is secondary to the fact that it needs to happen. Hyunsu stood up. He walked to the window and looked at the city for a long moment. He thought about the rooftop in Accra. He thought about the jewelry store. He thought about Tuesday dinner and the question she had asked him with those quiet, precise eyes. Is there someone else? And the lie he had told her with complete ease. He thought about the ring. Warm in the trash. He thought about Yuna, who had looked at him across that room last night with something he had read as desire and was now understanding had always been calculation. Who had used his vanity and his weakness and his slow willingness to believe that what felt like rest was actually love to dismantle 18 months of his organization's structural integrity from the inside. He had handed her the keys. He had pushed away the person who would have seen it coming and handed the keys to the person who had engineered the whole thing. He turned back from the window. Get me a number, he said. Not Sarah's. Her father's. Sungjin raised an eyebrow very slightly. If Sarah has already talked to him, and she has, then Kwame Osei already knows everything. And Kwame Osei is the only person in this situation who has both the power to restore that corridor and any conceivable reason to take my call. And if he doesn't take it? Hyunsu looked at the ring in his palm one final time. Then we find out exactly how much I've lost. Does it hurt to watch a man realize too late what he had? Have you ever been in a situation where someone only saw your value after you were already gone? Drop your truth in the comments. This story is hitting different, and I know you feel it. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear Sarah's story today, and subscribe because what happens next is where Sarah speaks, and what she says will change everything. Kwame Osei picked up on the third ring. Not the first. Not the second. The third. And in that small, deliberate gap, in those extra seconds that Kwame allowed to pass before he accepted the call, Hyunsu understood that the older man had been expecting this. Had probably been sitting somewhere in his Accra compound this Friday morning with his phone face up on a table, watching Hyunsu's name appear on the screen, and choosing consciously, unhurriedly, exactly when to answer. Everything with Kwame Osei was a choice. Nothing was accidental. Sarah had come by her precision honestly. Hyunsu, Kwame said. His voice was exactly as Hyunsu remembered it. Deep, unhurried, carrying that particular weight of a man who had lived enough life to no longer be moved by urgency he didn't create himself. Sir. Hyunsu had not called anyone sir in 15 years. The word came out without calculation. Thank you for taking my call. I almost didn't, Kwame said simply. Not as a threat. As a fact. A silence opened between them. Hyunsu understood that it was his silence to fill, that Kwame was not going to make this easier by asking questions or moving the conversation forward. He was going to sit in a craw in his compound and wait for the man who had disrespected his daughter to find whatever words he had available. Hyunsu looked at the ring on his desk. He had set it down in front of him before dialing. He didn't know exactly why, maybe as a reminder of what this call was actually about. What it was actually costing him. What it should have cost him before it came to this. I hurt your daughter, he said. Publicly. Repeatedly. In ways she did not deserve and never earned. I have no defense for it, and I'm not calling to offer one. Kwame said nothing. The corridor, Hyunsu started. Do not talk to me about the corridor. Kwame's voice did not rise. It dropped. Quieter and significantly more dangerous. Do you understand me? Do not sit on that phone and open this conversation with my daughter's pain and then move immediately to your business. Do not do that. Hyunsu stopped. Closed his eyes briefly. You're right. I'm sorry. Another silence. Longer this time. She called me 8 months ago, Kwame said finally. Did you know that? No. 8 months ago she called me and she did not cry and she did not ask me to do anything. She simply told me what was happening in her marriage and she asked me one question. She asked me whether the condition I had set 14 years ago, the condition she told me she had never shared with you, still stood. Hyunsu's jaw tightened. What did you tell her? I told her it had never stopped standing. A pause. I told her that I had given her time because she loved you and because I respect my daughter's choices. But that my word, once given, does not have an expiration date. 8 months ago, Hyunsu said quietly. She's been planning this for 8 months. She has been preparing, Kwame corrected him. There is a difference between planning to leave someone and preparing to survive the leaving with your dignity and your future intact. Sarah was not plotting against you. She was protecting herself because the man who was supposed to protect her had stopped doing his job. The words landed without drama and hit harder for it. I need to ask you something, Hyunsu said. Ask. Is there anything, any conversation, any terms, any path that leads to the corridor being restored? Not for my sake. I understand my position clearly. But there are people connected to this operation who have nothing to do with what happened between Sarah and me. Obligations that go beyond my personal situation. A very long silence. That is not a question for me, Kwame said. Hyunsu frowned. Sir, the corridor was opened because of Sarah. It was closed because of Sarah. Whether it reopens is therefore also because of Sarah. I am her father. I am not her decision maker. The faintest shift in Kwame's voice, something almost like pride. You want an answer to that question, you find a way to ask my daughter. If she agrees to speak to you, that is entirely her choice. She's blocked me on everything. Then I suggest, Kwame said, with the measured patience of a man who had run out of sympathy, but not out of fairness, that you find a way to be worth unblocking. The line went quiet for a moment. Is she all right? Hyunsu asked. The business calculation was gone from his voice now. Just the question. Raw and unguarded in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be all morning. Kwame considered this for a moment. She is with her family. She is safe. She slept. A pause. She is heartbroken, Hyunsu. Do not mistake her composure for the absence of pain. My daughter feels everything deeply. She simply refuses to perform her suffering for people who don't deserve the show. Hyunsu closed his eyes. I know, he said quietly. I know that about her. Then you always knew what you had, Kwame said. Which means the choices you made were not made in ignorance. They were made in comfort. That is a harder thing to forgive. He hung up. The Syndicate meeting happened at 3 p.m. in the private townhouse in the Gold Coast, the same venue where everything had publicly collapsed less than 24 hours earlier. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Hyunsu sat at the head of the table out of habit and watched the faces of 11 men who had built things alongside him and were now looking at him with varying arrangements of disappointment, calculation, and barely concealed readiness to move in whatever direction self-preservation pointed. Elderly sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded and his expression unreadable. Hyunsu did not wait for the accusations to organize themselves into formal objections. He spoke first. The corridor is down because I violated an agreement that underpinned it. Not a business agreement. A personal one. I gave my word to a woman who made the corridor possible and I broke it. That is the direct cause of where we are today. He looked around the table. I am not going to insult anyone in this room by pretending otherwise or constructing a version of events that protects my position at the expense of the truth. The room was very quiet. Additionally, he continued, there is a more immediate structural problem that requires action before this meeting concludes. He nodded to Sung Jin, who placed printed copies of the message thread, the one identifying Yuna's connection to the Los Angeles organization, in front of each person at the table. The quality of the silence changed as people read. Elderly read without expression. When he finished, he set the paper down with the careful deliberateness of a man controlling a significant internal response. How long has this been active? Elderly asked. 18 months, Hyunsu said. She came in with the agenda already in place. I was the access point. He stopped for the briefest moment. My personal situation was the mechanism that kept the access open. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. She needs to be removed, Elderly said. Completely. Immediately. And the Los Angeles situation needs to be addressed with appropriate seriousness. Agreed, Hyunsu said. I'll handle it personally. You'll handle it, Elderly said, after we resolve the corridor. Because without the corridor, this organization does not have the operational capacity to address Los Angeles with the seriousness it requires. He looked at Hyunsu directly. Can you reach Sarah? Not directly. Her father made clear that any conversation would be at her discretion. Then we wait for her discretion, Elderly said. Something in his tone had shifted, not softer exactly, but recalibrated. And while we wait, I want it understood around this table that Sarah Osei is to be treated with the full respect owed to someone whose relationship with this organization has been, he paused, choosing the word deliberately, undervalued. Whatever she decides. Whatever her terms are. We meet them. He looked around the table until he had eye contact from every person present. Are we agreed? A quiet chorus of assent moved around the room. Sarah's call came at 7 p.m. Not to Hyunsu. To Angela Reeves, her attorney, who relayed the message to the Syndicate's legal team in formal written language that was clean and precise and entirely devoid of the emotion that had produced it. Sarah had agreed to one conversation. Not with Hyunsu. With Elderly directly, as the representative of the organization. Her terms for the conversation were simple. It would happen on a video call, her attorney would be present, and the subject matter would be confined exclusively to the operational future of the corridor. Her personal situation, her marriage, and her decisions were not on the agenda and would not be discussed. Elderly agreed within 4 minutes of receiving the request. The call happened at 9 p.m. Hyunsu was not on it. He sat in his office 2 floors above the conference room where Sung-jin and Elderly and 3 senior members were gathered around a screen. And he sat with the ring on the desk in front of him and the city outside the window and a very specific kind of silence that is unique to men who are waiting to find out the cost of who they chose to be. He didn't have to wait long. Sung-jin came upstairs 40 minutes later. He sat across from Hyunsu and folded his hands on the desk between them. The corridor will be restored, Sung-jin said. Full operational capacity. Phased resumption over the next 10 days. Hyunsu exhaled slowly. Her terms. 3. Sung-jin met his eyes steadily. First, the organization formalizes its relationship with the Osei network through a direct partnership agreement. No intermediary. The relationship is documented and recognized as a principal partnership, not a subcontracted service. Kwame Osei sits at the table as an equal partner going forward. Hyunsu nodded slowly. That should have been the arrangement from the beginning. Yes, Sung-jin said simply. It should have been. Second, a financial acknowledgement. A significant one. Structured as a partnership buyout of the value the Osei network has contributed to the organization over 14 years without formal recognition. Angela Reeves has the figures. They are, he paused, substantial. And entirely justified. Agreed, Hyunsu said without hesitation. And the third. Sung-jin was quiet for a moment. The third condition was not negotiated by Angela Reeves, he said carefully. It came directly from Sarah herself. Verbally. At the end of the call, after everything else was agreed, she asked to speak without the attorneys present for 60 seconds. Hyunsu looked at him. What did she say? She said, Sung-jin looked down briefly, as though recalling the exact words. She said that the third condition was that John Hyunsu be removed from his operational position within the organization. Not prosecuted, not harmed, not pursued in any way. Simply removed. She said she would not rebuild a business relationship with an organization that was still being run by a man whose judgment had already proven fatal to it once. The office was very still. Elderly agreed? Hyunsu asked. Elderly agreed before she finished the sentence, Sung-jin said quietly. Hyunsu sat with that for a long moment. He looked at the ring. He looked at the city. He looked at the 14 years contained in the space between those two things, the ring and the city, the choice he had made and the life it had cost him. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. She's right, he said. Sung-jin looked at him. She's right, Hyunsu said again. Quieter. Like a man who has finally stopped arguing with the truth. My judgment was fatal. I had something extraordinary, and I treated it like it was ordinary, and the moment it stopped being convenient, I chose something easier. That's not a leader. That's not even a decent man. He picked up the ring one final time, turned it over, set it back down. She's right. A long silence settled between them. What will you do? Sung-jin asked. Hyun-soo looked out at the city for a moment. Then he pushed back from the desk and stood up and straightened his jacket with the automatic composure of a man who had spent decades keeping himself together in rooms where falling apart was not an option. I'll do what she asked, he said. I'll step down. I'll make it clean. No resistance, no conditions. He paused. And then I'll figure out who I am when I'm not hiding behind all of this. He walked to the door. Hyun-soo, Sung-jin said behind him. He stopped. For what it's worth, Sung-jin's voice was careful, genuine. She didn't ask for your destruction. She could have. She had everything she needed to take this organization apart completely. She chose not to. Hyun-soo was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. That's the most Sarah thing about all of it. A pause. She never wanted to destroy me. She just refused to keep saving me from myself. He walked out. In Accra, at the same hour, Sarah Osei sat on the rooftop of her father's compound, the same rooftop where a man had proposed to her under city lights 14 years ago with a ring he had spent 2 hours choosing because nothing else was good enough. She sat there with a glass of water and her father's hand over hers, and the warm African night wrapped around everything, and she felt not happy, not yet, that would take time, but free. Cleanly, completely, irrevocably free. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A notification from Angela. Everything confirmed. Everything signed. Everything done. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned the screen face down. Kwame squeezed her hand. It's over, he asked. Sarah looked out at the lights of Accra spreading across the darkness, below them bright and alive and entirely indifferent to the story that had just concluded in a city on the other side of the world. No, she said quietly. A small, certain smile moved across her face. It's not over. She looked at her father. It's just finally mine. And that is the story of Sarah Osei. A woman who never begged, never broke, and never once confused a man's inability to recognize her value with the reflection of her worth. She did not leave in pieces. She left in power. She did not ask to be chosen. She made herself impossible to replace, and when he replaced her anyway, she made sure he felt every single consequence of that decision for the rest of his life. Not out of revenge. Out of standards. There is a difference. Sarah knew the difference. And that difference was everything. If Sarah's story moved you, if something about a woman who stayed quiet, stayed strategic, and stayed winning hit you somewhere real, this comment section is yours. Tell me what you felt. Tell me what Sarah's walk out of that room meant to you. Tell me about the moment in your own life when you finally chose yourself. If you watched this entire story from beginning to end, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for getting this story to the people who need to hear it. Share this video with someone who needs Sarah's energy in their life today. And subscribe. Because there are more stories coming, stories with this same depth, this same fire, this same refusal to let powerful women be reduced to side characters in their own lives. Sarah Osei walked out of that room and never looked back. The question is, are you ready to do the same?